notes. Finance sometimes still does paper stuff, but I got post-it notes all over the place. I read it, emails and whatnot. So that helped out. ERP will streamline that process, hopefully, and many other processes and get us there. So it's very important that we do it. It's going to be hopefully one-stop shopping for most of what we do. It's going to automate most of what we do. Jim Tillman's smiling, and because purchasing is going to be a much more streamlined process. So it's very important that we get on board with this program. And it will make a lot of data and analytics easier for us. We'll be making better decisions, probably the same decisions you're making, because in your gut you know they're the right decisions. But when you're standing up here looking at the 5 guys and they go, prove it, you can't go, I know. You can say, well, here's the data backing it up, and give it to them. Or more importantly, if we are doing something a little bit too much or not enough, we can go, yeah, you're right, we overshot the runway on that a little bit, so we're going to dial it back this year because we have the analytics to prove it. Additionally, it's not going to get easier, but additionally, those citizens that want to get a little bit deeper into how we do business, I hope that the ERP will allow a little more transparency and a little more ease for citizens to dig into what we do without manipulating it and see what we do. Now, I still don't think we have an obligation to explain it in detail, but the information will be out there for the folks that know about government finance, know about government purchasing, know about government human resources to the extent that they need to get into that system, and can look at the data and make their own decisions and come up here and say, I got the analytics Jake just showed you to get that program. Let me show you the analytics that I pulled that say you shouldn't have that program. And then an argument ensues and we come up with a compromise and off we go to the races. So it's important on us. I will tell you that like anything I've done in the past, there's a roadmap to get from where we are to this ERP program, fully executable. That road is not a 6-lane paved beautiful road and we're the only ones on it. It's a dirt road, got potholes, we're not in a 4-wheel drive vehicle, and it's going to be treacherous. But we as a staff will make it through it. And at the end, it's the 6-lane road and smooth sailing. So there are going to be some bumps and bruises along the way. There are going to be some hard times along the way. I ask that you power through those. Think about all those times. I just explained and talked to the crew here about Public Works. Think about right now, if we were in the middle of ERP and Public Works had 12, 16 hours worth of ERP research and stuff to do to stay on schedule. It would be easy for them to say, hey, we just had a hurricane. I don't have time for this. Blow it off. And then we're 3 weeks behind. Unfortunately, in the execution of this plan to get there, you can't have that. So you're going to have to really, really think hard about how you're going to do these items that the team wants you to do. Get them done when you have the time, so when Hurricane Irma comes, you can go, thank God I did that last week. When I thought I was busy, but I'm a lot busier now. Don't procrastinate. Don't wait till the last minute, because your department heads and I and the team are going to hold you to that timeline. Very important that this process happens on time, not delayed. So it's going to take a little bit of sacrifice more. I know you're already sacrificing than we currently have. So it'll be a little bit extra time. For department heads, just keep track of overtime, please. If it takes overtime to get this stuff done, I want to keep it on schedule. I really do. So keep track of it, and we just had $222,000 added to the budget, so or was it subtracted? Ouch. So we'll, we'll get rid of soccer, kids baseball, and take care of it that way. The Christmas parade. We'll just can the Christmas parade. We're back on schedule.
Now we're talking.
You'd think Parks and Rec's clapped. The chief of police is like, so something tells me we're still going to have a parade. I apologize for that. But please give this your 110%. We appreciate it, and you all have met Jane. She's doing a great job. She's been through this before. We have a team of folks that are coming from GFOA and...
We don't know whoever the vendor is.
Oh, yeah, we don't know the vendor yet. So to help us through this process, and they've done it before too. So we have a team that's this isn't their first rodeo. They're gonna get us through it, but they're not gonna spoon feed us. So you have a lot of deliverables, and I want to set that expectation up front. And then we'll be giving Jane will be giving me updates. And we'll probably talk about them at the department head meeting every Thursday. No, Susan, we won't add to the time. We'll just try to truncate all the BS we do. And it'll be hard, but we'll do it. And then we'll press on. There's no doubt that we're going to run into roadblocks. But again, that's when we all get together and pick up the car, get over the roadblock, because we don't have a four-way drive, and we keep going. All right, any questions for me before I turn it over to Jane? Jane? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I think I've met most of you, but I see some people I haven't met before. So I'm going to be your project manager for the next couple of years, and my role here is to really champion the needs of the project and also to support you and anything you need going through this process, because like Jake was saying, it's not an easy one always. Just to go back to the beginning, so ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, and so I know Jake talked more detail about what it really means is just the way you do business, pulling it all together into one system and really making it a little bit more accessible, easier, online, more streamlined, and we're not going to do everything though. It's not going to fix the coffee pot on the second floor. So, because I think there's a bit, it doesn't fix everything. It's not going to be perfect, but we're going to focus on the core systems like the finance, HR, land, and really try and get those really hard business functions in the ERP. And the big piece is the integration. It's having the different parts talk to each other, so that it's going to reduce a lot of the manual labor, hopefully, that you have to do every day. Or I see a lot of it already, the reports that have to be redone and put into another system, then put in something else, and you've got to do something. There's so many steps you have to go through to get the things you need to do your normal jobs. So I'm hoping that that's going to make things a lot easier for you, but to get there is work. It's a lot of work. And when it goes live, it also, perfection doesn't occur on the go live day. That's when you have to troubleshoot. There's going to be a few issues, and I'm not trying to make it negative, but there's a lot of work, but it will be a big improvement. So that's the outcome. The goal, and my role, like I was saying, is to get you through it. And if there's something you need in your area or department to help you get the work done to make the project happen, let me know, because I'm here to help try and make that happen. And I'm also here to help remove obstacles. If something's blocking your way or you've got a problem, tell me about it, because I love stuff like that. So if I can remove an issue or make something work to the best of my ability, I'm here for you and your department to help you. I won't be making the tea or anything like that, but don't get too carried away with that. So we have GFOA here, Government Finance Officers Association, and they're going to help us through the planning part, because this is why we're going to have about a year-long worth of planning, because you can't rush into something like this. It's a lot of money, and there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. And I don't know that any of us in this room are expert enough to do this, but these guys are. They've done it before, and they have a lot of resources and a lot of expertise. So they're going to come in and review our business processes with us before we even start putting any software in. We have to make sure we know how we do things and that we're doing it right. So Eva and Jen are going to work with us the next couple of weeks, and we're going to sit down in a room with the finance department to start with and say, how do we do our general ledger? Let's document it, write it down in a flow chart, and then these guys are going to take it away and kind of try and line us up with the industry best practices and make sure we're doing it how the rest of the world is doing it as to the best we can. And so not only focus on the ERP-related business processes, but I see this is an opportunity for everything you do. It's time to relook at things and think about your policies. And is there to think outside of the box? You know, is there something else we could do related to this process that makes it better for everybody? Because there's probably things I'm sure you all complain about that you do every day. Like, why do we do this thing like this? Well, this is a time to rip that Band-Aid off and go, let's look at it differently, because many other improvements can be made. So it's a big culture shift of you know, going in a different direction and being able to do some of the things you might have wanted to do. So I'm here. If you need me to come and talk to your department or any of you, or you want me to come into any meeting to explain anything at any time, or just call me. I'm very available. I'm willing and ready to collaborate and help with anything, any concern, any question. And I've put a lot of information about the ERP in general on a web page on the Port Orange website. It's portorange.org/ERP. So hopefully quite easy to remember. And if you go there, I'm going to keep updating that as we get more info with like timelines and milestones and some of those things that we need. So that's a good reference point for you to go to. Or if somebody else external to Port Orange wants to know, send them to that. Say go to ERP, Port Orange/ERP, and that kind of checks off that one as well. So anyway, I'm going to hand over to Eva from GFOA, and she's going to talk more detail about what we're going to get into this week. Just so, Jane Davis, contact me if you have questions. I'm here for you. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Eva Olsaker. I'm with GFOA. This is Jen, my colleague Jen Carter. And so thanks for the introduction. Just another, it almost becomes a little bit of a joke about ERP. You know, what really does this mean? But it's just a fancy word for a software package that touches the entire enterprise. And the reality is that these projects, these processes that we're going to be talking about and changing, they touch everyone. They touch public safety, they touch purchasing, they touch budget. You know, you're paid out of these systems, you budget out of these systems, you buy goods and services. So just kind of think it's the whole entire enterprise, and that's really, I don't know who made that up 20 years ago, but it's been confusing for everyone, but that's that. So what we want to do is just kind of introduce you to kind of what this project is, introduce you to GFOA, who we are as an organization, and then also kind of lay the groundwork for what you guys can kind of expect without kind of putting you know, I don't want anyone to fall asleep, but not getting into too much detail, but really set the stage for what the reality is going to be moving forward. So that's what we thought. And then, of course, open QA time permitting. But I'm thinking, got a few slides. Hopefully it'll kind of educate everyone on what we're about to go on. So GFOA, and I won't bore you too much, but GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association. We're a membership-based association based out of Chicago. We've been around for over 100 years. We have office in DC, and our mission, the finance folks are obviously a little bit more familiar with who we are, but our mission is to promote best practice in public sector finance. Kind of short and sweet. From over 100 years ago, you get 10 people to get 10 accountants from governments. They collaborate. What's the best way to do things? We've expanded to almost 20,000 members. So the focus is, promoting best practice in finance. One of our kind of different services, consulting. That's kind of our group. We publish the Government Finance Review, a variety of books on financial planning that will probably bore most people, but a lot of folks in our office love finance, love accounting, love budgeting, and that's what everyone does, is talk about these things and issue best practice statements. These little CAFR achievement awards, people submit their budgets to GFOA, submit their CAFR, we review them, and we give awards for governments that are publishing, public sector documents that are, that meet the kind of the gold standard GFOA criteria. So a lot of people are familiar with who we are, and a lot of organizations strive to kind of get the GFOA award. You'll probably see them and posted on your wall and so forth. So so in addition to GFOA, and this is where kind of our role comes in, is that we have these committees that are established based on function. So budgeting, debt, kind of more technical accounting, capital improvement planning. And these basically group of government employees, they're volunteers, get together, meet periodically, and talk about the issues and the concerns that are happening in the current state. And what these groups and committees do are issue best practice. So they issue best practice on purchasing and budgeting. So basically your peers out in the United States and Canada are essentially sharing with you what kind of best practices regarding certain functions. And so we help kind of translate that down to organizations such as yourself that are going to be essentially potentially turning your processes kind of upside down. Maybe, maybe not. That's what we kind of want to learn. And so our group, we're in the Research and Consulting Center. We started back in, 98, let's say. Before Y2K, a lot of you remember the bombs were going to drop and Y2K was going to kill computers and all this good stuff. The reality is that during that time, there were a lot of new, powerful financial management systems that were being implemented in the event of Y2K. Like, Navaline's going to go down, green screen gone forever, it's going to die. I need to bring in PeopleSoft. I need to bring in Oracle. I need to bring in Navaline to prepare for basically Y2K. Unfortunately, what happened at that time, and it still happens today, is that certain consultants or certain elected officials or someone decided, hey, we got to go with this one. And basically you pick it and you implement it. Although what happens is that that system may or may not actually have been the right fit for the organization. And people have growing pains and things were hard. And ultimately you decide, okay, that may not have been the right solution that we should have done. We should have planned for it a little bit more. And so our board, GFOA board, asked certain individuals, they're actually employees now of GFOA, coming out of Pittsburgh, to help develop a practice to help governments through this process. And so that's ultimately how kind of our group started, with the, lots of governments kind of implemented software packages right around the year 2000. You're basically right around that time frame, 15, 20 years later, here we are. And so our group was decided to help governments through this process. We don't have any partnerships or allegiance with vendors by design. We're completely vendor neutral. We're familiar with pretty much everyone out there, but our job is to help the organization get as much out of this process as you basically can. We want to see folks have successful projects. We've probably worked with probably pushing now 500 organizations in some similar capacity. We're kind of scattered throughout the United States. We work a lot in Florida, a lot in California, and then just kind of a lot, scattered throughout. So what we also do is we draw on our expertise in the office. So if something unique comes up, which always does with each organization, there are about 10 to 15 in our consulting group, and so we throw things and get opinions from other staff within GFOA. So, and we also definitely leverage our membership, and we'll say, hey, city of X, what worked well for you, what didn't work well for you. And so we definitely kind of, you'll be able to glean GFOA's membership experience. So enough on that. Who we are, so I'm Eva Olsaker. I've been with GFOA almost 12 years, approaching 12 years this year, time flies. And I tend to focus almost the vast majority of, I guess, my work on small to medium-sized governments, working through process improvement opportunities, ERP selection, negotiation. So I'm also involved with the small government forum. You guys technically don't qualify, but if you did, I'd have you join the forum where we talk about small government needs. And I'm definitely looking forward to this project. It should be fun. It's always fun to get down to Florida. Mike Muha, who's right here in the middle, he's our director, and he's also the deputy director of the entire GFOA organization. He will kind of act as an engagement manager. He's met a couple of the folks at the city, and he'll basically take a lead on the negotiation once you guys kind of get there. So you may or may not see him. And then Genevieve Carter.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Jen Carter. I am pretty new to GFOA. I've been there less than a year so far, so I'm going to be assisting Eva mostly with a lot of the process improvement, helping you all map out your processes, and really assisting in any other way I can as we sort of formulate best practices. So I'm very excited to meet all of you, and hopefully we'll get to know each other over the next couple weeks. So thanks.
All right. Okay, so now you've met us a little bit. Hopefully you get a pretty better understanding of who GFOA is. So this is going to be like, all right, what's the real deal? What are we doing here? So our approach is a multitask approach that builds off of each basically step to get you to project planning and then ultimately to the implementation where we've essentially made as many positive decisions as we can. So this task one, so this little yellow star, that's where we are. We're at the beginning, and we want to take a look at your processes, take a look at your current process, and come up with some recommendations on to-be process. We'll get into this a little bit more. And then taking a look at what are your needs from a functional requirement standpoint, developing an RFP, we're going to help you out with that. Actually selecting, it's a pretty in-depth process, but actually selecting who you want to go with from an implementation vendor standpoint and then also from a software vendor standpoint. And there's a little, there are variations there. And then the negotiations is essentially the kind of the final piece. But the idea here is that we're learning about you now, we're making decisions. Those decisions that we make regarding process get included in the requirements. Those decisions get included in the RFP, including terms that are really important to you guys. Hey, we're going to be doing our procure to pay process is going to be this way. We're going to throw that into the RFP if we want to do that. But the idea is you're going to be sharing with the vendor community what you've done and ultimately kind of where you want to be so that they know, all right, these guys have done their homework. They know what decisions they've made, and then knock on wood, from a implementation standpoint, the idea is that you've already made some decisions before whatever vendor shows up. Because what often happens is that people don't make decisions beforehand, and the vendor shows up and is like, well, how do you guys buy stuff now? Well, we call the John Doe vendor and the computer shows up and then we pay it. Okay, cool, sounds good. Is that what you want to do right now? Yeah, okay. We need to make a decision in about a week. And then, what a lot of organizations have done is that you would implement that system that way. And that's technically not best practice. So the idea here is, all right, we're going to be doing things this way. And then when the vendor shows up, you're like, this is how we're going to do it. Okay, cool. 3 weeks worth of decision making and stress within the org. How are we going to do it? You've already made these high level decisions. And it's going to be like, okay, let's just do it. This is an important decision and we already made it. So it's a really important kind of step in this significant process. So all the steps build on each other. The task one, and this is going to be setting the foundation for kind of where you guys will go in the future, is just kind of we're going to review your process. We're going to document how you guys currently do things. It's not going to be at a detailed level. I don't need to know what function key you guys push on Naviline to post a journal entry. Nope, that's not really all that important. What we want to understand is from a high-level process, how do you buy goods and services? How do you guys track your projects? How do you apply for grants? And how does that hit the financial system? So it's going to be, let's get a basic understanding of how you guys do things so that if there are process improvement opportunities, we kind of talk about it kind of now. We'll be talking about a lot of things, but then based off of our experience, we'll also share with you in these meetings what we see kind of available in the marketplace, but then also start to set the stage of, okay, maybe we should start thinking about potentially should we do something different. We'll also look at potential options. And the big thing would be identify any process changes that we want to essentially change. And again, it's based off of best practice. And then what we'll do, and you'll see some samples here, but the idea here is understand what you do now, and then we'll make recommendations on essentially best practice, and we'll basically build you a new map, and then the city will get together and be like, okay, this makes sense. We're on board. We've made the decision, we're doing this in the future. And so that's happening in this first task, and it's one of the more crucial parts. So why do we process map? The big thing is that these ERP systems are really based on functional process. And process is going to be how you guys actually function as a business. How you guys click and navigate, that's just the tool. But the idea here is what do we need from an actual process? And ERPs are based off of functional process. We want to just get a general understanding and get a cross-section of folks together at the table, because what typically happens is that departments do certain things slightly different. And one of the things that would be nice in these projects is to standardize things if it's appropriate. And it's always good for different departments to hear how Public Works, track time. Oh, well, that's different than public safety, and HR does it this way. And we basically kind of learn from each other during these meetings as well. But also we're going to be identifying what you guys need from a requirements standpoint. This thing, towards the bottom, highly collaborative, and we want a cross-section of stakeholders. This is going to be really important. We don't want this to be like finance driving, making decisions. We don't necessarily want IT to be making decisions. This is going to touch everyone, and the process, the way that you guys do things every day, is a part of this project. So we need basically all the key folks at the table talking about whatever process it is. And then everyone will kind of hear, kind of what's going on, and then ultimately what we would potentially see the future to look like. Okay, this is kind of an ugly map, but it really just kind of illustrates, and we touch on purchasing a little bit. It's a nice, easy subject to talk about. But this would be how a lot of organizations buy something. Department says, hey, I request to buy a computer or whatever. And they document it in an Excel spreadsheet, go to your boss, hey, can I buy the $1,000 computer? Okay, cool, yeah, you can do it. Ultimately gets entered into a system, and then there may be another approval. But the idea here is that, it's kind of tracked in Excel and manual, and it's more verbal or email approval. And then, sure enough, purchasing has to look at it to make sure it makes sense. Yeah, we're going to approve it. And then we probably have maybe some carbon copy POs, 5 colors. One goes to you, one goes to the mayor if it's over $1 million, and then everyone has these color POs, right? And then ultimately the vendor gets it, and they're like, okay, cool, I'm going to send the city of Port Orange the $500 laptop. This is what often happens. But so then what we want to talk about from a future state is what would make sense to possibly not necessarily do. We still want to make sure that the requisition's hitting the system. We don't need to track anything in Excel. We don't need to ask Jake if it's okay to buy the police car. You can do that in the system. And then the approvals happen, and then ultimately, no need for these color carbon, paper copies, and then basically just electronically then send it to the vendor. So we start to identify kind of a future vision of how this would kind of look. And this is kind of the idea how we would go from the current process to ultimately what the new process would be, and be like, does this make sense? Yep, makes sense. All right, we're moving forward. This is how we're going to do it. This is just a sample from a small county in Wisconsin. We're not going to step through this, but the idea is that we have these stakeholders, so departments, finance, kind of who are the key players in whatever the process is, and we, kind of plot out what the process is. And I know it's hard to see, but who's the role, who's involved with that? It could be a purchasing manager, just a budget analyst, a time entry approver, and then what system it is. So here, this is a manual process. The finance director down below is approving. It's manual, and it's basically what the process is, who's involved, and what system is being used. And to us, a system could even be a Post-it note. I always put a reminder on my door every month to pay the bond, payment or whatever. I mean, technically, that's a system that you guys are using to help manage your business. All of those sorts of manual things, we kind of consider kind of a system because it's a part of your process. So this is what we'll essentially do here, starting this afternoon. And then I'll kind of look a little bit more on the future state. So that's task 1, understanding what the process is and helping identify basically a future state process. Requirements. So it's technically a separate task, even though it's really a lot of the information that we're gathering is happening in these mapping meetings. So what do you guys need out of a system? These mapping sessions are really kind of collaborative, and at the same time, we do want to hear some of the issues that you guys have. Like, I can't print reports. I always have to track my budget to actual in Excel because Naviline can't do that. I'm kind of making this up. But the idea here is we start to gather what you guys need from a requirement standpoint. So we're starting to gather those initially now. You guys already have developed a list that's kind of already starting to be massaged, I guess. But then we also want to identify what sort of system-wide requirements that you guys would have. Some of this is a little technical, but not really. It's kind of related to, we want electronic workflow. We need to be able to approve transactions within the system. So we're starting to gather these types of things basically today, now. But ultimately what will happen is that they'll be documented, and they'll be part of it's a big Excel spreadsheet that'll be attached to the RFP, and the vendors respond. But it's a very important part of the way to see how the vendors can meet what needs you guys have identified. Okay, so here's kind of this example. So again, the focus is what's the process? Okay, I need to requisition or the PO. And here's a sample map of what it'll kind of look like for you guys. But then the requirements build off of that process. So what do we need from a requisition process? And then we identify what those needs are in the Excel spreadsheet. We can kind of bore you with some of these details later, but the idea here is that it's focused on the process, and we want to translate that into a document the vendors can say if they can or they cannot meet what you guys are looking for. Okay. Task 3, RFP development. So what we're going to be doing, GFOA has established kind of I'm sure there are a lot that are kind of floating around there, but kind of our standard best practice template for RFPs. The big thing is that it includes terms and conditions that we would never recommend any client or government issue an RFP out with having certain protections. So that's really kind of the value you're getting. An RFP document is an RFP, but there are certain terms and conditions that we really will require to be in there. But we'll basically work with you, develop a draft RFP that you guys will then ultimately release. And some of these terms and conditions, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, are really designed to protect the organization once the implementation happens. So I won't bore you with those details, but they're really important. And because the vendors have they find different things important than what you do. So we're kind of the watchdog mechanism to make sure that that there are protections that are out there. Governance, and what this means is that we will essentially assist if we see any change management issues that need to that come up. We'll share with you what has worked well with other organizations. We'll review your charter that you guys have developed, the governance structure, which is essentially kind of the playbook on how the city is going to be going through this process and who are the key players and what sort of ground rules are around those groups. So like the steering committee, the selection team, what the role of the project manager is, kind of identifying the ground rules and the playbook for the key players. But then also we'll kind of help talk about communication plan, let you know what other organizations have done. But the big thing is if there are certain things that we see that maybe you guys should, that we'd recommend from a change management standpoint, we'll obviously share that information with you guys. Okay. All right, so here's a little bit more of the fun stuff. So this is where a lot of staff will actually be able to kind of visualize, and it'll make a little bit more sense because this is when the RFP has been released, and the vendors have responded to your RFP. So you're like, cool, we got 8 proposals, we got 10 proposals, could be more. It's very possible it's more. But this is when you're starting to get an understanding of who wants your business. And you guys will go through the process of reviewing proposals. I'll get into details. GFOA will also assist. We recommend 3. Bring in 3 teams for software demos and interviews. So you'll be able to get to know them, meet them. It's a really important part of the process. Discovery is typically 2 vendors, and it's focused on the implementation. At this point, the software is the software. They all can, cut checks and make electronic payments. I mean, all the big ticket items that government needs to run a business are there. But project success is really on the implementation side. It's not, what software you load in. It's how that organization, from an implementation standpoint, can help you guys reach ultimately your goals. So discovery is you're down to 2, and you focus in on what's it going to look like when I live with this vendor for 2 years. What's their approach? How can they help us? We have weaknesses here. Can they help us out there? So that's really kind of getting down to you guys are close to making a decision. Negotiations, that's exactly what it is. You guys have identified one, and we start to, GFOA generally takes the lead on this in conjunction with local legal, but to finalize the statement of work and whatever other contract documents that are out there. I'll just breeze past that. That's legalese stuff. Okay, I know you can't read this, but Jane touched on it. Finance, HR payroll, purchasing, AR, treasury, basically everything. No community development. Utility billing we're going to take a look at. So the idea is that in asset management is that we're going to be learning and understanding about how you guys do stuff related to these processes. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything will be included in the RFP. Maybe, maybe not, but this is part of some of the analysis. We need to know what systems are out there. But these are all the areas that we're going to be meeting with you guys on. And again, the kind of cool, fancy little circles here. Again, touching it on the enterprise. All of these systems and processes touch each other. Okay, expectations. So this is really, and we will touch on what it really means to you, and we'll answer any questions that you have. But this really is a collaborative kind of process. GFOA is going to be helping. City's going to be taking the lead. And from a mapping standpoint, GFOA is going to be helping do some of the mapping. We'll kind of drive it. And then you guys are going to be doing some of the mapping on your own. So we're actually going to kick off this afternoon with some of the GL accounting stuff, purchasing tomorrow, and utility billing. But then Jane will be also facilitating some other mapping meetings. So it's kind of we're both going to be participating in that process. So we're not going to do all of them. Again, we've touched on this, but GFOL will identify any process recommendations that we have. We're going to share that to you with the updated maps. Based off of your functional requirements list, we will add, we'll review the requirements list that you guys have, and then we'll essentially share our feedback. And it might be potential, we'll see, but we'll basically kind of make our edits to that document and provide our rationale as to why our edits are there. But the big thing is focus on the process and what you guys need to do regarding that process, not like I want a drop-down menu. You know, that each system's different. And then we will develop the initial draft RFP. That's, you know, kind of boring procurement stuff, issuing an RFP, but we will definitely assist with all of that and all of the supplemental attachments that would be required for it. Okay, and this is also where it gets to be a little bit more exciting. You've received the proposals, you know, say you get 8. Certain people within the city are actually going to are tasked to review all of those proposals. GFOA is also going to read those proposals and provide our feedback. We're not going to, we're going to be focusing in on what are the risk areas, what doesn't look right, and basically share anything back to you that needs to be kind of clarified. So any kind of alarm bells, our job is to share that with you so that you kind of understand what the vendors are essentially proposing. And it could just be a lot of questions. They didn't answer this. All right, well, what does that mean? Why didn't they answer this question? But the big thing is you guys are going to be reading the proposals, and GFOA will, and we'll provide a report back to you guys based off of our analysis, focusing in on risks. The big thing is that the city selection team is charged and tasked to make decisions on the behalf of the city. So the idea here is we have a group of folks. They're going to be reading the proposals, and as a collective group who's looking at the city's best interest, say, okay, we got 8. We want to move these 3 forward. And then after that, we want to move these 2 forward. And ultimately, this is the software team that collectively, as this group, we want to move forward with. We think it's the best solution and the best implementation firm for the city. And that's by design. It's a cross-section of people, and that basically your peers are thinking about what you guys need and ultimately coming together and saying, out of these 10, this is the one that we want. And it's kind of fun, actually, because you're really getting to it validates your decision. You understand what the vendor community is like, and ultimately you guys are kind of charged with making a decision. What we don't necessarily want are, you know, one person making a decision for the entire organization when everyone's needs really kind of need to be taken into account. And again, part of this is scoring and evaluating. And we can, if you guys don't have any tools regarding, you know, scoring and weighting, we have templates and samples that we're more than happy to share with you guys on what works well with other organizations. Okay, so then we're kind of going off of the idea that, you know, we've got software demos and software interviews. We'll provide the city with demo scripts. So part of what we're also gathering when we have these meetings with you is trying to get an understanding of what you guys want to see out of a system demo. So we'll draft some very detailed scripted demos and provide that to you guys. And then you guys will ultimately tweak it if you want. But the idea is scripted demos keep the vendors on task so that every vendor is showing you the exact same thing. If they don't show you, you know, demos regarding requisition, let's say, and someone does, that might lead you to believe that maybe they don't really have a really strong requisition and they just talk about their cool dashboard. You know, generally, vendors only want to show you what's kind of cool about their system, but scripted demos are it's an even playing field. The city wants to see all of these things, and everyone needs to show it and provide it. And it's a really fair, methodical way for you guys for the team to evaluate who you ultimately kind of move forward. The vendors will kind of whine a little bit about it and complain like, oh, we've got 3 days worth of scripted demos or 2 days, whatever, 4 days, 5 days. But the reality is that they know it's a fair process, and that's what we want is it to be super fair. Everyone's getting the same shake at it, and that's really the ultimate design. So we'll share with you our scripts. Another thing that's important is that the idea is that it shouldn't just be focused on software. Yeah, we need to know how you build a report, and all that is super important. But you also need to understand how they're going to help you implement best practice. What are they going to do to help you finalize decisions regarding the chart of account? Do you have like 2 days for it? So the idea is to start to get an understanding of what their implementation methodology is, because that's really going to be where a lot of your success is, and to focus in some of these implementation discussions when you bring them on site. Discovery. Again, this is focusing in on, you've gone from 3 to 2, focus on implementation. GFOA will be there, so we do need those that are attending the demos to kind of take notes. What sort of questions still need to be asked of John Doe vendor, and we'll help facilitate that. But the idea, generally it's a 2-day session, 1 day per vendor, but really focusing in on discovering what the implementation will ultimately kind of look like. And then negotiations is negotiations, and the vast majority of folks will be kind of out of it at that point. But then it could be a fairly fast process, or it could be a fairly slow process. We don't necessarily know. But at that point, we're in negotiation. Okay. So this is really kind of getting into what to expect regarding if you've been asked to participate in a mapping meeting, maybe this afternoon, maybe tomorrow. So what should I expect regarding these process meetings? Basically, just come prepared to talk about whatever the process is. If we're talking about purchasing, come prepared to talk about how you guys buy goods and services. If you happen to have your policies regarding purchasing thresholds in a nice, clean document, perfect, bring it. If you have a copy of your PO that that has some unique things on it, if you have a copy handy, bring it. I don't want you to, kind of go hunt and bring a big stack of things. But if there are certain things, copy of a PO, maybe a budget to actual report that people kind of have, any policies and procedures that's kind of important to the process, by all means bring it, but for the most part just come prepared to talk about the actual process. Some people may attend a lot of meetings, and some may attend only certain process meetings. It's just, all right, what are we talking about? Certain departments have a key person that does everything from buying, approving time, tracking projects and tracking grants. So that person may be attending a good chunk of the meetings, whereas some people may only attend certain meetings if they're just the budget person. So this is also, again, we've touched on it, but super important. We want to have a cross-section of staff that actually participate. Who are the consumers out of the outside departments, above and beyond finance, who are involved with the process? So what may happen is like, oh, it would have been good if, next week we're talking about HR, let's say. Oh, we need to make sure that Eva from police attends because she approves all of the timesheets. If those sorts of things come up, let Jane know. I know she's already kind of done a lot of that, but the idea here is that we want to get an understanding of how different departments are involved with that process. There is an element of a time commitment. Right now, I would say it's definitely kind of fairly manageable, but the reality is once you guys are at that point in about a year from now where you've identified who you're moving with, certain people who are involved with certain kind of functions will be pretty active in the process. There are definitely going to be kind of peaks and valleys, but the idea here is that we need a commitment from staff to basically follow through and help implement and design the system that everyone's been spending so much time and effort and planning for. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Expectation, we need leadership buy-in. The reality is that, folks at the top are not proponents of this project, are not aware of it, and not necessarily wanting it. It's easy for things to go off course. You guys are in a position, you have that buy-in, that leadership, that need to see what the future will look like, and that's super important, and it's really happy that you guys have that. But the big thing is that this really, not knowing what everything is happening in public safety, but ERPs really are at the top of the food chain regarding important projects because it touches everyone. And the idea here is that if there are certain meetings, we need to make decisions, everyone needs to treat it as the important project that it is because we're talking employees' pay, we're talking how you guys build financial reports, and if we asked you to participate, we basically need your input and to treat it as the important project that it is. The reality is it's probably one of the more important projects that you guys will be involved with over the next potentially 10 years. So, the good thing is that they don't last forever. And then you get up and you get all the cool things and everyone's happy. Okay, so what this is really designed to do is just kind of visually let you know where we're going to ask you guys to participate a little bit. So up front, the business process analysis, we need you to participate in the half-day, potentially all-day sessions. regarding the process. So if you've been invited, attend these meetings. We want your input to understand how things work. And this doesn't necessarily last super long. I mean, depending on what your role in the organization is, you might be attending a variety of these. But please participate. We want your input. Reviewing the functional requirements. And then once GFOA provides you the 2B maps, we'll review those together, and we want you to, kind of regroup and talk about what a future process may look like for the city. Reviewing requirements, we need to make sure that the requirements reflect what you guys need. Maybe you guys have meetings, maybe you guys provide feedback, and share that to Jane. I'm not sure, but we need people to review the requirements. And then also during the vendor selection. So during the RFP stage, a lot of different folks are going to be kind of handling that, and a couple key people. But then during vendor selection, if you're on the selection project team, basically you're going to be reviewing all of the proposals. GFOA will help you out to do some training on kind of how to read a proposal. But the idea here is that if you're on that task list to review the proposal, you need to review them. We're seeing the market to be pretty competitive. We typically expect it to be about 8 to 10 hours to thoroughly understand what's in the response. There could be a couple that you weed out because they may not have met certain minimum criteria, but the reality is that we need folks to actually read it and then elevate it. And then software demos, obviously, we need folks to participate. And this would be folks outside of kind of the quote-unquote selection team. So subject matter experts come in. We're talking about time entry and payroll. All right, that's me. I'm going to go sit in on that for all of the vendors. So it could be that you participate either through all of the software demos and interviews, or just maybe during key parts that are a little bit more appropriate to what your job is back at the office. And then discovery, it's more of a smaller group, the selection team, but it could be that some subject matter experts kind of attend certain pieces. But that's only, it's just a couple days. And then the negotiations, for the most part, everyone's off the hook for a little while the contract's negotiated. And then during the implementation, then you get into a whole nother level of effort and whatnot. But essentially, if functional leads within certain processes generally are very actively involved with the implementation. Okay. So I know we'll have a little time for questions, but I thought we would kind of share with you what GFOA has experienced regarding the ERP market, so kind of what we see. So this, might be a little bit more entertaining. The market changes fairly consistently. A few years ago, there are lots of acquisitions, and people are buying each other out. Software vendors are buying best of breed so that they have everything under the sun that public sector will need. But the reality is that we have public sector only focused ERP vendors, and then also private and public sector vendors as well. And so just to kind of throw out a name, Tyler Munis is public sector only. They've been in this market space for a long time. They only focus on public sector, so that's their niche. Well, then you have other firms like Infor or Oracle or SAP or Microsoft, where they work with public sector organizations and then also software organizations. The idea, and at this point now, for the most part, everyone has it, is that they have functionality that can meet public sector needs. Can you encumber, is there budget control that can provide encumbrances? For the reality is they pretty much all can. But the idea here is that the marketplace is very vast, it's very flexible, and public sector and private sector will propose and be interested to your RFP. This is where there are big, potentially big differences. The idea here is that each implementation approach works, but there are differences. So there's kind of the homework approach, and what this means is that the implementation firm will come in and talk to you guys about certain processes, things that they need, and then say, all right, I'm going to be back in 2 weeks, so you need to do homework on this and have it completed so that we can kind of keep going. It works, but you need a lot of discipline on the internal side to make sure that these sorts of things are actually getting completed and accomplished in a timely manner so that due dates don't get, things don't go off course. The other is more of a consultative approach, and this is where the implementation firms are a little bit more embedded, kind of spending a little bit more time on site, kind of throughout the project. So a lot of it has to do with what the needs of the organizations are, but it's a super important part of this process is understanding if we pick X and if we pick Y, what is that going to look like from an implementation standpoint? Do we have the bodies to help implement based off of this approach? Okay, maybe not. All right, well then we got to talk about something else. So it's a really important part of this is that there are different approaches. Okay, this hosted and SaaS offering, basically what that means is that the ERP market has made significant strides in the last 10 years, and everything doesn't need to be housed here on site. We don't need to have a server room in the basement to load the ERP. The idea is that a lot of organizations don't want to manage and maintain, all the software and hardware physically here. So these firms will essentially do that for you. Hosted means is that it's kind of your box, your data. We're just going to physically move it from the closet down the hallway, and it's going to sit in Maine or it's going to sit in Dallas. It all works. It's all internet. They're all web-based. But the idea is that they'll basically make sure that the lights work, that security is being run, the system's performing the way that it does. Basically relieve the organization of having someone on IT just kind of managing and maintaining it. The SaaS offering and what this is software as a service. Certain vendors, this could be, certain vendors choose a certain definition that they want SaaS to mean, but the generic definition is software as a service. So the idea is that you are basically paying an annual or a monthly payment to use whatever the ERP is. And they're all cloud-based. Some of these hosted models may provide a SaaS pricing, but your data is just plopped over in a different part of the country. There are other vendors where it's more true SaaS, more true cloud, and what that means is that you're really using their software. You're getting the updates a little bit more on a consistent basis. Hosted, you're still deciding what you kind of upgrade. From a SaaS standpoint, still the subscription model, but the vast majority of the users are on a fairly similar version. And what we're definitely seeing is that there were concerns years ago about security. Well, I've got to have, Joe always looking at it. It's got to be in the basement. People are going to hack and all this fun stuff. Some of those days are kind of over. The reality is that, there have been enough people, the philosophy has been embraced and people are seeing the benefits for it. And all of the vendors, for the vast point, can provide hosted and SaaS models. So that's good. It's basically kind of a part of the progression. If you guys do require it to sit in the basement, that's something that would be kind of discussion, but for the most part, no one's really concerned about that the way that people were, 10 years ago. We kind of always joke, do you want Eva in the closet to worry about security, or do you want someone else who's paid to do that every day? You don't want me doing that, but, and then this is, so then on the process improvement and change management, these important functions of the implementation are now becoming more involved, that the vendors are starting to pay more attention to it because they see that it's important. They want project success, and these sorts of things ultimately are going to lead to project success. And so there are more key components that philosophy and methodology, they're including these in their implementation approach. And that's good because ultimately that's going to lead to, from what we believe, project success, because who can get us to reach our goals? And part of what we believe, or part of your improvements are going to be some of your higher goals that you want to achieve. Okay, this is the fun facts of ERP. These projects are hard. They're definitely not impossible. But the key to success is planning as much as you can for these. What we don't want is, and the reality is that the planning effort starts a year before you even know who you're going to be kind of going with. To make sure that you're identifying your improvement opportunities, do we need to ensure that we have adequate staffing? Do we have any policies and procedures that we should change or possibly change because we're going to be going with a new ERP vendor in about a year? And so all of these planning things are ultimately going to be leading for your success. You don't want to be making these decisions when, the implementer's here saying, so you've got a purchasing threshold that this, city manager needs to approve everything over $100. Yep, is that what you want to continue? Well, I don't know. But that to me would be something that you would want to think about and make those decisions. We're going to relook our thresholds, and this is what they're going to be. And if you do that in advance, ultimately, and that's what we're going to be doing essentially now, is talking about how do we need to make any changes, and let's do that now so that we don't, get pressed for time once we are in the throes of implementation. Too much emphasis on the software. The reality is the vendors that are going to be interested in working with you guys, they can meet the vast majority of what you guys are looking for. How you guys click in the training is a clear component, but how you guys are going to transform the way that you guys work with your customers, the way that you guys interact with each other, that's really going to be where you're going to see kind of project success. And so that's where kind of the focus is. What we recommend is that you document what your goals are. That will be a part of essentially the RFP. You're telling the community, we want X, Y, Z, and these are going to be this is our benchmark if we did it or didn't. And it should be a fairly high-level, broad goal so that when you're in the throes of implementation and a vendor says, well, why don't you add on this cool point-of-sale system for the parks, system to track your Cokes that you sell. Oh, that sounds great. Well, your goal is to not necessarily do point-of-sale. So focus in on what are the goals for this immediate project, and then you can add in on some of those bells and whistles. What's really important is that you're laying the foundation for your, financial system. You're laying that foundation now that will then kind of allow you to kind of add on some of those other potentially bells and whistles that you would maybe want to do later. So focus in on what's important and don't add scope. Basically, scope creep will potentially kill your project. This is big. ERP vendors do not share your goals. Some maybe a little bit more than others, but the reality, not so much. They want to come in and they're going to be like, all right, I know in about a month I'm going to get a $100,000 payment for doing X. And they're going to come in and try and do it very quickly and say, Jane, you ready to pay me for the $100,000? And it happens immediately. And the reality is that there are payment schedules and payment, structures on how they're going to get paid, and that's fair. But what we need to make sure in is that we don't accept anything until we're ready to accept it. And their goal is they're getting tapped on the shoulder. All right, we're expecting to get this revenue from Port Orange. Where's this revenue? Where's this revenue? And in a way, they want project success because they want you as a reference, but at the same time, they want to get in and get out as quickly as possible. And for you to go live as quickly as possible means that they can get out as quickly as possible. And from our standpoint, we're like, no, we need to make sure that we're implementing the way that we're supposed to be implementing and for what we paid for. And your requirements that you guys develop is essentially what you guys are paying for to have implemented. So like, nope, we were supposed to get this, we were supposed to get this, we were supposed to get this. So they want to get in and get out. And our goals are to make sure that we are implementing what we need and want. Yeah. Okay, just overall success factors. Identifying process improvements and making the strategic decision, yes, we're going to do this moving forward. This is best practice. This makes sense. It's going to be making everyone's life easier from a taxpayer standpoint. We're going to be more transparent. We're going to be spending public goods, public funds appropriately, and really moving forward with that. Engage the entire organization. We don't want it to be that just EVA's making these decisions. This touches everyone, so we want to make sure that everyone is aware of it and everyone participates kind of basically where appropriate. We can't have 500 people attending, meetings, but we want to have key stakeholders who should be at the table. We want them at the table. Sponsorship, we spoke about that. If it's not there at the top, it's easy to get off course. But that is very much a driving success factor, is that the top is saying we want to do this as an organization because of all the improvements that we are ultimately going to achieve. Manageable scope. This is really important. There's always an element, and kind of coming off of Naviline, where in a lot of these older legacy systems, everything's on there. Utility billing, community development, purchasing, like everything. Dispatch, all of these solutions that public sectors need. But what's important is that we keep the scope manageable so that you set the foundation good. So basically focus on the core. Some of the fancy bells and whistles, we might be able to do that later, or we make a strategic decision on how we're going to be approaching these things that are coming off of Naviline and how we're going to be approaching them. So, but the big thing is keep the scope manageable and for what the organization can handle, and not biting off too much. So competitive process, it's super important. It helps validate ultimately who you guys go with. And obviously you are, but not every organization does that. There could be an element of question, like, well, I wasn't involved with this process, we just did this. But the competitive process really helps identify, you get to see who's out there, and ultimately how you guys made the best decision for the city. Clearly defined scope, and then mitigate as much risks as we possibly can. Fairly obvious, but super important. Okay, so approach the end of the slide deck here. I'm Eva Olsaker, again with GFOA. Here's my contact info. Jane's going to be your primary point here in the city. And yeah, I guess any questions?
Can you go back to the previous slide?
So what the plan is for this week is that we are going to be talking about accounting, the chart of account structure, how Naviline's working, basically understanding your chart segments, how you guys are tracking projects and grants, how you guys are handling journal entries, and then just kind of general financial reporting. So kind of just get an understanding of how Naviline works for you guys. And then tomorrow, pretty much all procure to pay. We broke them into half day. We'll see if it takes all day, but that's yet to be determined. But so essentially, let's talk about how you guys buy goods and services. And then Thursday, we'll be talking about utility billing. And we're coming back, I don't remember. Yes, October 16th. And then we'll probably need another week to come back to finalize any meetings that we may have, some follow-up meetings. And then probably asset management we'll need to include there. So we'll be back for sure 2 additional times to document what you guys do from a current state process. And then we'll need a little bit of time, but then we'll develop future state process. We'll essentially regroup. It'll be a little bit more, we're not going to need all day for procure to pay, for example. But the idea here is that we'll mark up the maps. Like, this is what we would envision. Let's talk about it. And then ultimately make some early decisions in the next couple of months. Any questions? You excited?
Eva, another question.
Oh.
Eva, would you balance the concept of scope creep and functional requirements?
Yeah, we would say that limit have the organization make a clear commitment on what is in that RFP from the begin with, which would include the requirements, and keep that to a manageable scope. We recommend kind of focusing in on the core functions, but what often happens during scope creep or even scope coming off is that in the throes of implementation, you may want to add something. We would say, don't do that unless everyone feels that everything's under control, but that probably wouldn't be the case. But then also, on the other side of that would be if for you guys to push certain things where you would go live and delay it. But so basically, kind of keep it, if you develop the requirements that will be a part of the RFP, essentially make that commitment and understand what that means from an implementation standpoint. What we see is working quite well is focusing in on finance, purchasing, and HR payroll.
Okay, and that's the establishment of the data and the reporting?
Yeah, the systems will allow you to report on whatever is in the system, right? Using those embedded reporting tools.
Okay.
I would assume that instead of scope creep, if the organization finds something that would be interesting to implement above and beyond what was included in the original request and the RFP and the response, as a team, we could always keep that information with us, and then after we implement, then go back over those things to say, well, we've got a little extra money left over. We really like that module, and then we can go back and look because we'll have the resources back replenished and add those things later.
Yep, you could do that. You know, it's kind of like the ERP, meaning finance, purchasing, HR payroll is the core, and focusing on that. Clearly, there are vendors that have kind of everything, but from an implementation standpoint, the reality is that if you're going to be, what we typically see is that finance goes first, then HR payroll kind of goes second. You got to make sure that your house is in order. You know, the chart's good, purchasing is working, and then you kind of get to those other functions. Different approaches is you can have maybe some implementations kind of run parallel. At the same time, there could be different folks that are involved with those implementation, but I think we need to understand a little bit more about the organization before scope is 100% finalized. We are working with a city right now that's coming off of Naviline, and they happen to have a best of breed for HR payroll, but they're focusing on kind of finance, and they're releasing separate RFPs for UB and community development, and I think something else. But I think this is part of what the analysis will, you know, we'll need to talk about this a little bit more.
Sorry, one more. During this time, I know there's a lot of pressure also. We've been kind of held back as an organization for a while in getting to the 21st century. So there are a lot of software products out there that we're looking at. What's GFOA's recommendation, having gone through this a lot of times, when you're looking at an ERP, but you're also looking at this big piece of software here, this big piece of software over here, you know, going parallel and implementing at the same time, waiting to see what we get as an ERP or some other version of that.
So what's the question exactly?
Do you like chocolate ice cream or
Yeah.
vanilla?
Yeah.
If you
Oh.
recommendation on other software, large software purchases at the same time as where we are right now till implementation of the ERP. Complementary systems that could either link into the system or actually be a module for the ERP that you're getting.
So, right, and so that's where kind of the development of the final RFP will need to be kind of solidified within what the city wants. But a lot of these best of breeds that are out there, community development, asset management, utility billing, these are all best of breed solutions that are out there. They're fairly specialized. The idea is that those best of breed solutions, whatever they are, if they meet your needs, odds are they're kind of modern systems that can interface into the that can talk to the ERP. If we happen to know what those are, we would want to make sure from a requirement standpoint that that's included in the RFP. But generally, these systems, where there needs to be analysis is understanding how the interface works, what sort of data. But generally, these systems can talk to each other in this day and age. I understand there's probably some, I'm going to guess there might be some systems that aren't integrated to Naviline, but that's just the nature of some of these older legacy systems. It's not that easy to do, so you just don't do it. But there, some organizations have included optional functions for those ones that are kind of coming off. A lot of organizations leave the old system running for a year or two, focus, and then bring some others on board. But I think it's safe that you probably could do some parallel, if it's not included.
Aren't most of the ERP systems and the third-party software in this day and age SQL-based, and they're all intercompatible anyway?
Pretty much. From what we, don't quote me on this, but I'm not technical. Huh? Oh, that's true. The Oracle e-business suite. So Oracle has a variety of products, ERP products that are out there. They have JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, Oracle e-business suite. I'm sure they have some other ones. But then they also have their cloud product, which is what we typically now see on the public sector space. I believe the Oracle e-business suite is the only one that has a real hard technical requirement from a database. The others are Microsoft SQL, and so we're not seeing kind of compatibility issues now that we did kind of years ago. And especially these systems are web-based, so it's like, how's your internet, basically? That's the more concern than some of the other more technical aspects.
I have a question for the team. Brings up a good point. For Jamie and the IT team, is our bandwidth going to be enough to assume all the responsibilities that ERP might bring to it? Is that something we're looking at as well? Are we already ahead of it, or do we have to throw money at our backbone in order to not keep everybody frustrated because they're waiting to get up to the cloud to download a document? James. Good. Thank you. I heard we're good.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
We see that most people are kind of fine on that. That's one of the, you need the internet to every single day, and that's usually generally not an issue. But from an RFP standpoint, we'll ask what their minimum requirements are, what their minimum recommendations are for speed. So you'll kind of get the technical stuff that the IT shop needs to make sure that you guys are in good shape. The only thing that we
conversation about how much IT is going to have to support this as a group of people and the team. Sorry, as in bandwidth, maybe if you mean by the team and how much they can, not just internet bandwidth, but IT as a department. That will be part of the selection as to what technically you can do in-house. Can they do the integration? And they got programming? I mean, you might have only one person who has some limited experience, and if that's the case, then that will help determine the vendor, because they're going to have to do that for us. So unless you're planning on hiring 3 IT people who can handle ERP integration and programming, so.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. That is accurate. Sorry, I was nodding instead of...
Sometimes you nod when I'm saying something. But if you have anything else, I could just come back to get my email and email me more questions too.
Everybody good? Okay. Tons of questions. We don't know what we don't know?
Yeah.
All right. As things come up, one of the things that we all asked, that just got asked again, is,
I know.
is that you know, a lot of you have software programs in the queue that I've kind of put the brakes on, because what I don't want is to spend thousands of dollars on a program that's only good for 2 years, and we roll in with some new technology and go, oh, that's great, didn't last 2 years and we're already switching it up. Or there's a module in ERP that is better suited for the whole enterprise, if you will. So be smart. I know you want to move forward with this software, but be smart, work with Jane, make sure you're making the right decision for the right reasons. And if we have to suck it up, buttercup, for another 2 years to get, doors closed, right? To get a Porsche instead of a Honda, because that seems to be the comparison around here lately, then we'll do so. But if we need a car, by golly, let's get the car. So take a look at that stuff. I know community development's looking at online permitting, some other stuff, Jennifer. I know that I think Robin, city clerk's looking for some automation. I know the attorney already has some. I don't know if you're looking for new. I forget whether it made into the budget or not, or it's another department. But something to think about moving forward, all right? And if you need to wait, ask the hard questions of Jane and the team, and then we'll decide whether to delay or not. But don't just buy it because you want it. Think about it, all right? Are we wrapping, or are we going to delay this departure forever?
All right, well, thanks. And we'll see some of you this afternoon, I'm sure.